after one of the all-time great nights in the history of South Florida sports, one of the biggest nights and biggest wins in the history of the Miami Heat. We continue on this week. We are celebrating. We are super excited for the finals getting going. Of course, Stanley Cup finals over the weekend. Dan LeBatard joining us here. LeBatard Show, YouTube, everywhere you get your podcast. You know what I'm talking about. Thank you so much for joining us here. Let me ask you, if the Heat fan, Dan, you know, the Heat fan was crushed, myself included. I did not have the faith leading up to Game 7. But if the Heat fan, now that we know, you pump the Heat fan with truth serum. Now that we know the way it ended with the Game 7 win and crushing the Celtics and the Celtics fan souls, would we take the way that it ended, winning up there in Game 6, over if we would have held on in Game 6 and won that game at home? What would the Heat fan choose?
This is one of the things, Zaz, that we've been arguing, and thank you for having me on your show. For, I think, 14 years now, what I keep arguing is that one of the greatest things about this roller coaster that sports gives us, that makes us hyperventilate and is unlike anything really in entertainment, is the fear. So I ask people, like, I like doing this as a sociological test. With 3 seconds left in that game the other day, I texted a handful of people, fun? Is this fun? Yeah, it's fun. Now it's fun. It's fun now. It wasn't fun all game, but now it's fun. And then 3 seconds later, or 2.9 seconds later, it's not fun. It's not only not fun, but you're walking around for 2 days with a hole in your stomach because a bunch of people putting a ball in a hole has affected your life so much that it's unlike anything in entertainment. So, yeah, it's better to go from up 3-0 to tied 3-3 to Boston having a coronation where the arena that they entered was celebrating a championship. And then on the very first play, the air starts leaking out of the building. Again, Zaz, on the very first play of that historic franchise that has become a rivalry franchise for the Miami Heat, I think we can say that's their greatest rival, period. Not a second place. Those are the tiers that taste best. Those are the two teams that have been competing for the top of the Eastern Conference. To see slowly, drip by drip, the air leaking out of the building so much that the Heat's alleged most scared player, Duncan Robinson, is holding a hand to his ear saying, hey, Boston, I can't hear you anymore, as they stream out the exits. You can make the argument that that felt better than anything that the Heat have ever felt that isn't at the very end of winning a championship, that there is no feeling like the one they gave you because the heartbreak was so immense, because there's nothing like that in entertainment, Zaz, that in 3 seconds or by a tenth of a second could make joy go to despair, back to joy 48 hours later.
It really is so stupid because for 48 hours, I was moping around. You would have thought I was grieving a loss of a relative, like someone died in my life for 48 hours in between 6 and 7. And I did have a moment where I said to myself, why am I letting this ruin my life? For 2 days, it had ruined my life.
You are an alleged adult. I will say again that there is nothing like this in entertainment. You do not walk around with a hole in your stomach for 2 days because of the vicarious living through others that you do through sports. Zaz, the reason that you and I are able to make a career in this is because people care like that about this stupid thing. It does not have perspective. You do not jump up and down that way when your child is born in the hospital room, the way that you do at the end of a game. You can say that's the greatest day of your life, the day that your child was born, but you don't jump up and down screaming the way that you do at a sporting event. And you're right. The loss feels like a heaviness that you can feel silly feeling it, but you can't help feeling it. You can't do anything about, oh my God, I've got a weight in my stomach. Why is that there? This is all stupid. It is the most important thing in the world. I'm an idiot.
How were they not scared going into that game yesterday? Like my whole thing, I did not think they were going to win Game 7. I was very clear about that. because I don't know how you recover from the way Game 6 ended. And they were never scared. I guess, they take after their leader, they take after Jimmy, and he certainly doesn't waver emotionally. And I couldn't believe how they weren't scared in that game.
Zaz, at the end of Game 6, I'm listening on my television to Stan Van Gundy saying of Jimmy Butler, and you've seen what Jimmy Butler has been for 3 years. The postseason numbers are not up for dispute. They're in the realm of Michael Jordan. Stan Van Gundy was saying on your television, he's intimidated. He's intimidated. He couldn't get off the ground. His legs didn't work. There's this weird thing over the last couple of seasons with the Celtics where having the home court advantage means absolutely nothing. It means you lose. It means you lose at such an enormous clip, as I'm not making this number up. When you look at like the last 24 games, the home winning percentage is like Detroit Pistons this year. Detroit Pistons, the worst team in the league. You could not win at home. They were comfortable in that setting. They won the first 2 games in that setting. They won a bunch of games there last year. They know that team, and they clearly were not afraid. And I think when you say, how are they not afraid? They played so many games like that this year. And once you get very early, first play of the game, you get Tatum hurts his ankle and they miss their first 11 threes. That's when Boston starts feeling it. Like, that's when you can feel that the energy of whatever that place was no longer an advantage because of how quiet it was, because what surrounded them was fear. What surrounded them was understandable fear because they don't trust that team, because they know that the other coach is the better coach. They know that once Tatum is out, oh my God, our Supermax player, Jaylen Brown, is going to have more turnovers going to his left than anyone has ever had in an Eastern Conference Final Game 7 because he couldn't dribble anymore. And when you ask me, why is it that they weren't afraid? How many of those games have they played this year? Like, I know they're regular season games, but all they do is play close games. Like, what do they have to lose when they're the 8th seed? And they shouldn't have been in Game 6. They maybe shouldn't have even been in the playoffs, given how the play-in games went. They didn't have much of a season, so all they've given us is bonus, extra, when I think a lot of us gave up on this season a lot of different ways, and with good reason. Zaz, there's stats. Like, what are you doing with your stats when you're in the 20s in everything all season? You're in the 30s in scoring. You're not top 10. You're not top 20. You're bottom half of the league on all of your chief statistics. Like, why would anyone in a Heat uniform have any reason to think that there was any pressure on them when they've stunk all year, stunk by their standards?
How about all throughout the season, most of us would say something like, you can't be a championship team if Caleb Martin is a starter on your team. Unbelievable.
You say that. Well, I mean, there's some stats, though. Caleb Martin's being paid less by the Heat than the Mets are paying Bobby Bonilla. Caleb Martin, I believe, had more points than Jaylen Brown on like 50 fewer shots in the series. I think Caleb Martin and Tyler Hero combined for more threes in the series than Tatum and Jaylen Brown. That was startling to watch, to hear the broadcaster say, is Caleb Martin this team's number one? He's playing like a number one. Caleb Martin gave the Miami Heat everything that the Boston Celtics needed from Jaylen Brown. That series was not decided because Jimmy Butler was better than Jason Tatum. That series was decided because Caleb Martin was a good deal better than Jaylen Brown.
So you have a problem, it sounds like, with Caleb Martin not winning the conference MVP.
Well, he should have won the MVP. I prefer the funny than to having a problem. Reggie Miller on the broadcast saying again and again that he should win the MVP, and then when it was time to vote, he was the swing vote that made Jimmy Butler the MVP.
How does that happen?
I mean, that's funny, right?
How does that happen?
That is the Stukatsification of all media right there. Just give a bunch of opinions in a bunch of different places, and some of them will be right. You don't have to worry about anything in the way of consistency.
I love how, I think it was the guys after the game talking about Caleb Martin going to get paid, back up that Brinks truck. It's like, yeah, we have him under contract for 2 more years at $6 million a year. Like, he's going to have to wait a little bit to wind up getting paid. Like, unbelievable. Unbelievable.
But all of it, Gabe Vincent will probably be paid, but he's Gabe Vincent. Like, it's one of the things I don't even remember. You will know this off the top of your head because you are both a Heat scholar and someone who pays attention to the details. But I burst out laughing when they gave Haywood Highsmith's credentials from college, like when they're just sort of stumbling through whatever that was, Division II. I'm watching strip, dunk, fool around on Jason Tatum, and then they start telling you, yes, Haywood Highsmith from, Division II college, blah, 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 blah. What the Heat are doing has no precedent in the history of that sport.
I got to tell you, let me ask you a couple things about Boston that I've been talking about. Number one, Jaylen Brown. We've been talking about, like, people have been talking about this for weeks now. $300 million, all NBA this offseason. Like, he just had the chance. Tatum's hurt. It's game 7 to go to the finals. You want to be a number one. He was horrific. And now $300 million? Like, how do you do that?
He is eligible for the Supermax, which would make him the richest player in the franchises. The richest player in the NBA. Yeah. It would be the biggest contract in the entire NBA. And when you say how do you do that? That is why it was a blueprint game, in the same way that LeBron James many years ago went into Boston for Game 6 on what was a blueprint game. There were many people on television at 3-0 saying, you've got to break it up. You've got to break up the Celtics. Then they get back to 3-3 and people start changing their mind. It happens that quickly when the games matter like this and the stakes get ratcheted to this high a place where you can go from being someone who makes a lot of money to someone who loses a lot of money, because I believe Jaylen Brown should have cost himself the confidence of not just the Boston fan base, but the Boston front office, because he is what he is as a player. Within 3 years what players are. Bam Adebayo, you could do it on the other side. What you've seen from Bam is what he is. He's not going to get a good deal better than that. That's what he is. You can want him to get better. He has gotten better, but the chief improvement with players is usually within 3 years. You know what they are. This is what Jaylen Brown is, and what Jaylen Brown is not good enough for that kind of contract if you're going to pair him with Tatum, and he's not going to be your second best player because that's not good enough. You need someone to make him the team's third best player.
As a journalist, does Joe Mazzulla's behavior with the media offend you? Because I'm watching him with Ali LaForce in between quarters. I'm watching him with Abby Chin after the game, who works for NBC Sports Boston. And the attitude and the way he speaks to them, to me, is gross.
It's humorless. What he is doing is pressurized. If you don't think that you have perspective when you're walking around with a hole in your stomach and you're off to the periphery of the side of the stage, Joe Mazzulla, who is 8 years younger than you, with the pressure of all of Boston history on him, with that fan base breathing its uncomfortable bad breath on his neck. Like, my guess is that he's got a lot of reasons to be humorless. My guess is that that's not a very happy job for him when the pressure gets stacked up. And I haven't seen a whole lot of personality from him. And when you look at what that team was last year and what it was this year, and you see that one of the key differences is the coach, and one of the few differences is the coach, and you see an 8 seed beat a 1 seed, I understand why it is that man would be a special kind of miserable.
I know this is something that gets talked about or has been talked about in the past on your show, specifically coming from Stu Gatz, and it has bothered the hell out of me for a couple of years now. Like, we're finally at the place where nobody ever has the right to say that Pat Riley has failed Jimmy Butler, right? Jimmy Butler has had no success in his career before coming here. And now in 4 years, he's in the conference finals 3 times and the NBA finals twice. Like, we can't talk about Pat Riley failing Jimmy Butler, right?
Why would you take any words or syllables that Stugotz has to say about anything, given that he's got a 20-year resume of those words being either lies or meaning nothing? Why would you find yourself bothered by anything that Jimmy Butler or anything that Stugotz says about Pat Riley? I think that Pat Riley should be golden in this town forever for a number of different reasons. One of them being the very simple reason that you don't get many franchises that are allowed to be this relevant for this long while overturning their roster all the time. The Sacramento Kings just made the playoffs for the first time in 17 seasons. I've seen Budenholzer as a Hawks coach win 61 games coach of the year, and then the Hawks stop mattering right after that. It's not easy to stay at the top of the sport relevant, no matter that Pat Riley has done it at 3 different franchises, 3 different places, and not coincidentally, took it 25 years ago from New York and brought it down here, and New York hasn't had it since. Hasn't had it since because he took it with him. In terms of what it is you're looking at, though, Zaz, as someone who appreciates the history of this franchise, I ask you this question because you're a fan, and I'll go back to the numbers I didn't articulate earlier from StatMuse on the Heat this season. 30th in points, 27th in rebounds, 28th in assists, 25th in offensive rating, 21st in net rating. So bottom third of the league in just about all the categories. I have maintained some objection from the shipping container that if they win the title this year, it will be the best feeling that a Heat fan has ever had, because it's the greatest thing in sports. It's the surprise. You didn't expect anything. The fear was large with those LeBron teams. The stakes were high because the country was laughing at you. But the surprise, that's not allowed to be a surprise when you've got LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh on your team. Yeah. This in the history of this sport, a sport that doesn't tend to be random, this winning the title would be the biggest surprise in the history of the sport, and I maintain the greatest feeling a Heat fan has ever had.
We've never had the surprise. Even, those titles with LeBron, that's the expectation. Even the title with Shaq and Dwayne Wade, that was the expectation. We've never had the surprise run. And if you want to say that the bubble was a surprise, yeah, it was, but it doesn't have the atmosphere of playing at home, playing away. Like, it's not the same as, like, the fear that I had last night, I never had that kind of fear in the bubble because you don't have the crowd element involved in the game. You're not scared because, holy shit, we're on the road tonight facing elimination. That wasn't in the bubble. So it's a different experience. We've never had the underdog feel the surprise element to it. So this is so extraordinary and so unique. I think the only one that would compare if they won the whole thing is the first time, because it was the first time. But I can tell you, yeah, if they won it this year, it would be a bigger feeling than any of the ones with LeBron. Yeah, for sure.
I have felt fear in arenas while watching Heat games. I don't believe that I have seen or felt the fear that was around the Heat this year. And I'm talking about last year as well, because I know that went 7 games, but those games were super weird and they were lopsided and they weren't close. And it was just a confusing series all around. I have not felt the fear that makes some of these things so fun in 10 years here, in maybe more than 10 years, when LeBron was ratcheting everything up to a place where it did feel like the nation was rooting against the Miami Heat. I thought that the game between 6 and 7 had more fear in it than anything I've felt in a decade down here.
Well, yeah, because I didn't want, like, you think I need blowing a 3-0 lead, only team ever? Like, I need that shit in my life? That's forever. I never lived that down. Like, that was the fear. And it's against our greatest rival. It's against Boston. Like, that was the fear. Finally, Dan, I need to ask you. So Riley, and you see Alonzo Mourning, he stands next to him the whole game, like we saw the other night. And they're sitting like in the crowd. You know, they're like a few rows up, the media seats that are given to family and friends of the team. Do you think, like, do Boston fans yell things at him throughout the game? Does he, like, does just ignore everything? Like, what must that experience be like? They hate Pat Riley's guts going back to the 80s. Like, are they not yelling things at him all throughout the game?
Yes, I'm going to tell you a secret here because I was offline talking to Pat Riley about some of the stuff during the series, and this is not revisionist history. This is going back to this entire playoff run because I think everyone listening to this understands that Pat Riley can choose whatever seat he wishes to have in whatever arena he wishes to have. And if he wished to be apart from that stuff, he would sit in a skybox or something. He loves it. He loves being in the center of people hating him and angry. He likes it more than being at home. He enjoys, he says that it is a greater state of living because unlike some of the people with the hole in their stomach, he is saying, what are they going to do to me at the end of this? They're not going to hang me in the town square by my thumbs. We're going to lose a basketball game. Do you know how many of these I've played? Do you know how many times I've been gutted by the Boston Celtics? This goes back to the 70s and 80s, and I refuse to retire. Why? Because I love sitting in the middle of all of that, letting them yell everything they want to yell. And then my most scared player, Duncan Robinson, is holding an ear to the crowd because it's so quiet. And he's listening to all those people file out around him. Doesn't like it, Zaz. Loves it more than home games, loves sitting right in the middle of the cauldron and having them yell whatever it is they want to yell at him.
That's so good. Dan, as long as you have the power back up and running in the Metalog studios, tell everybody how they can catch you guys. Go ahead.
I am so despondent at what happened to our show yesterday. I was making the argument because we've never had a power outage. It's never happened in the history of us doing the show. It happened yesterday on what I would say is the day of all the last 20 years was the worst day for it to happen. It could have happened any other day and not felt like that day, but we did get the show up and running a couple of hours late. You can find it obviously wherever it is that you find your podcast. You could also watch pieces of it on YouTube, LeBatard Show, LeBatard and Friends. Thank you for plugging that for me. It has been a fun time, and now we get 2 more weeks of it.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate you, man.
Thank you, buddy. Likewise.